In 1801, explorers paddled deep into the Amazon, seeking a lake few dared to name. They carried maps and powder, but found prints too wide for any known beast, and carcasses crushed as if by colossal coils. Warning spoke of a water mother that stirred when the trees bent back from the shore, a monstrous entity that guarded its domain with ancient fury. Still, they pressed on. What rose from those depths left only silence, scars, and a terror no map could ever truly hold. Before we continue this harrowing journey, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten tales. Thank you. We set off from the mouth of a narrow tributary at first light, the heavy air pressing against our faces and the damp of the night still trapped under the tarps. Our 2 canoes rode low, laden with sacks of fina, salt pork, a chest of powder and shot, a small chest of glass vials, and the roll of charts that Captain Dwart guarded under oilcloth. I kept the journal and tended the samples, recording every detail. Father Celestino, a man of quiet faith, carried a wooden cross and a worn satchel of herbs. His gaze often turned skyward. Ramos, a soldier on loan from the garrison at Barcelos, sat with a musket across his knees, a bored look he did not try to hide, yet his eyes missed nothing. Arawa, our seasoned guide, stood in the bow of a lead canoe, paddle in hand, his young cousin Davi near his hip, quiet and watchful. The purpose was simple, on paper. We were to track a chain of dark water streams to a remote lake that local traders mentioned only in half-finished sentences. Our mission: take bearings, collect plants, mark the course, and return before the flood rose too high for safe landings. That was how the captain told it to the governor, and that was how he told it to us. But the Amazon, as we would soon discover, rarely adheres to any man's plans. The stream was narrow enough that branches leaned over us, forming a suffocating tunnel of green. The water ran black and slow, carrying the stale taste of rotting leaves and dense mats of vegetation under its surface. The fish rose without sound, dimpling the water's skin before vanishing again. A persistent dampness crept into everything, chilling us despite the oppressive heat that sat still beneath the canopy, refusing any relief. We moved by the steady rhythm of paddles, tapping the surface and lifting again. Long stretches of silence, broken only by the soft knocking of hulls, when a hidden root caught us. By midday, we came to a spit where the current turned, revealing a clay bank that bore the unmistakable print of something heavy, something colossal, that had pulled itself out of the water and back in again. The marks were wide and smooth, devoid of any claws, and the reeds were flattened, as if by immense pressure. I initially thought of a river cow, but quickly dismissed it. The distance between the sweeps was far longer than any I had ever seen. Captain Dwart peered at the mud, a flicker of unease in his eyes, before he shrugged it off. "Everything grows well here," he said, "even the tails." He disliked delays, checking the sun before calling us back to the canoes, his dismissiveness doing little to quell the growing unease. Our journey continued, and near the next bend, we passed the carcass of a capybara, wedged in a tangle of roots. Its ribs showed through dark hide, but there were no bite marks along its edges. The body looked crushed in the middle, as if wrapped by powerful bands. I took the length of it with my eye and said nothing, a sour taste rising in my mouth that had nothing to do with the heat. Ramos prodded it with the butt of his musket, and the whole mass shifted, slipping further beneath the tangle. Davi, usually stoic, stepped back on the thwart without a word, his young face pale. In the afternoon, we met a pair of local traders, their hollowed trunk boat hauled onto a sandbar. They had a small heap of gourds and baskets of dried fish, but their eyes moved nervously between us and the dark bank, never resting. When Arawa told them the name of the creek and the lake beyond, they did not repeat the word. The older man spat, his gaze distant. "The mouth of that lake," he said, his voice low, "is where the water mother sleeps and wakes. The trees there lean back from the shore." He held his hands apart, moving them in a slow, wide circle, and I did not mistake his meaning. Dwart, ever the pragmatist, offered them tobacco, thanked them, and pushed us off. When we were out of earshot, he instructed me to note in the journal that 2 men in a trunk boat had attempted to frighten us for gain. I wrote only that we met them and exchanged tobacco, unwilling to dismiss the chilling warning so easily. Toward evening, a thin, iridescent film spread across the surface, where a side stream joined ours. It shimmered with a faint, oily sheen and smelled distinctly of musk. Our canoe glided through it, the film parting and closing again behind us as if the water itself was alive. Flies rose in bursts and settled, their buzzing a stark contrast to the growing silence of the forest. Father Celestino damped a cloth and tied it over his mouth and nose, pressing his cross to his chest with one hand, the other steady on the gunwale. "The water holds what it must," he murmured, a habit of speaking to no one in particular when discomfort grew. Ramos called ahead, asking if the smell came from a plant. Araua did not answer, merely nudging the bow toward the middle where the black ran clearest, his silence more unsettling than any reply. We camped on a raised patch where the ground held firmer than the surrounding mud. We cut palm for a lean-to, set the fire in a ring of stones, and hung hammocks from 3 sturdy trunks. The fire smoked for a long time, struggling to take a strong flame, its meager light barely pushing back the encroaching shadows. Mosquitoes sank into any patch of skin not painted with rancid grease. Our meal was hardtack and salted meat softened in a pot, which Davi ate without lifting his eyes. When the food was done, I cleaned the vials and repacked them while the captain checked his charts again by firelight. He measured with calloused fingers, setting marks with a stub of charcoal that left dust on his knuckles. I watched his hands, thinking that he trusted numbers and lines more than any living thing in that ancient, untamed place. In the dead of night, something bumped the hull twice, a soft, heavy thud, followed by a longer scrape that traveled from bow to stern with slow, deliberate pressure. I lay awake, counting my breaths, every nerve on edge. The scrape did not repeat. Somewhere out in the dark, a branch cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Water lapped on the far side of the spit where we had pulled the canoes up and tied them securely. I kept my back to the struggling fire, trying not to imagine the line settling loose, the canoes drifting away into the inky blackness. In the morning, the knots held tight, but the sand around the bows showed a shallow furrow, as if something immense had pressed against them and shifted them inch by inch. I told myself the tide had lifted and dropped, attempting to rationalize away the undeniable evidence of a massive, unseen presence. The sun had not yet cleared the oppressive canopy when we pushed off again, the silence of the crew heavier than the morning mist. The banks changed abruptly after that. The dense trees drew back, leaving a collar of bare, dark mud where no saplings took root, as if the very earth recoiled from the approaching water. The river deepened beneath the surface, without showing a change in color, and our paddle blades no longer found bottom where they had before. An unnerving absence of birds stretched for a distance that felt too long for chance. Every sound we made came back thin, swallowed by the unnatural quiet. I looked to the others, seeing them avoiding each other's eyes. It was not fear yet, not outright panic, but a chilling sense that our noise did not belong in that sacred, hushed space. By midday, we saw the mouth of the lake. The stream opened into still water that spread to a line of drowned trunks and floating logs. The surface held a pale scum near the shore, but the center was clear, black, and fathomless. 2 poles stood at the mouth, each wrapped with woven grass and marked with shallow cuts. Feathers hung from them, their bindings new. Davi, who had been almost entirely silent, touched the edge of one feather and quickly drew back his hand. "We should not cross," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I had not heard him speak a full sentence until then. Araua, our guide, stood with his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the center of the lake. He did not answer his cousin, which told me enough. Duarte, his voice carefully even, declared, "We will skirt the margin. We mark the extent. We do not linger." He did not look at the poles, did not ask what they meant. He was tired of warnings. Father Celestino lifted his cross and made a sign over the water, a short prayer for safe passage and for restraint. Ramos checked the priming on his musket and grinned without humor. "If it is a fish," he said, "it will taste the same as any other." But I saw his hands shake when he set the weapon across his thighs. We moved along the fringe where the scum swirled in slow loops around the paddles, a sickening dance. Bubbles rose in clusters and broke, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. The smell of musk returned, stronger, more pervasive than before, clinging to the air like a shroud. I counted the time between the clusters of bubbles. There was no order to it, no discernible pattern. A large log turned by itself with no wind to move it, a silent, unnatural rotation that sent a shiver down my spine. Our canoe drifted away from the other for a moment, and I pulled us back with 2 short strokes. I felt no current, yet we slipped sideways between strokes, a subtle, unseen force tugging at the hull. The hairs at the back of my neck lifted in a way I could not dismiss, a primal warning against the unseen depths below. The lake was not merely still, it felt alive, watchful, and deeply hostile. Near a tongue of reeds, Davi, his voice still low, pointed at something pale under the surface. It was a strip of tissue, long and narrow, caught on a sunken branch. It undulated without the aid of current, then stilled, a ghostly presence in the black water. When we brought the canoe close, it came free and rose, and I caught it with the edge of my paddle, lifting it toward the bow. It was the outer layer of a shed skin, translucent and thick, with the unmistakable pattern of scale edges pressed into it. The sheer width of it made my mouth dry, a sudden realization of the creature's immense size hitting me with the force of a physical blow. I laid it along the thwart without speaking, the silence in the canoe profound. Captain Dwart looked at it, his face unreadable, and did not ask me to pack it. He simply told me to note the find later, refusing to meet my eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the terrifying truth. Then we heard a sound, unlike the crack of branches or the splash of a fish. It was the slow expulsion of air through a wet passage, followed by silence, and then the sound again, farther off. It came from under the surface, not above it, a deep, resonant exhalation that seemed to vibrate through the water itself. We froze without instruction, every muscle tense, every breath held. The water around the bow showed a series of rings that spread, touched the reeds, and then vanished, leaving only a shimmering, unsettling stillness. I felt a cold line in my stomach, a primal dread that had nothing to do with the heat of the day. I waited for a third breath, but it did not come, leaving us in a chilling silence, confirming an unseen presence of unimaginable scale. We reached a small rise at the edge of the lake, where roots gripped the mud, offering a precarious spot to step out. We made a noon fire, more to boil water and keep the mosquitoes off than for comfort. For comfort seemed a distant memory. The fire caught better here, its smoke rising lazily into the humid air. I took the shed skin to the shade and measured its width with a strip of cloth, marking it and rolling it with care. I did not look toward the center of the lake again while I worked, my focus a desperate attempt to maintain composure. Behind me, the others spoke in low voices. I heard Davi argue with Arawa in his own tongue, then fall quiet. Ramos boasted he would put a ball through any beast that showed itself, his words thin and forced, spoken to fill the air. I did not correct him. I watched the lines on the cloth, trying to think only of numbers, only of logic. When we pushed off to continue our circuit, the water darkened ahead in a moving patch. It was not the shadow of a cloud. The sky above us held none. The patch passed, and we sat still, watching it slide under, slow and steady, without bubbles or fins. The canoes rocked gently in its wake with a motion that did not match the size of the disturbance. No one spoke. I did not raise my paddle. I felt the movement under us as a pressure in my bones, more than a motion of the hull. I told myself then that we could still turn back. I looked at the poles at the mouth of the lake and at the straight line of trees beyond. I thought of the distance already covered, of the river rising later in the season, and of the reports we had promised to deliver. Then the patch of dark water curved, and the reeds on the far side bent and slowly righted, and a wide, distinct V appeared in the scum, holding there, pointing directly toward us. I rested my paddle across my knees and kept my eyes on that V. I am not a brave man by nature, but at that moment I did not feel fear in the way that paralyzes. I felt a thread pulled tight inside me, that said we had stepped into a place where the rules of the larger river did not hold, and that everything we did from that point forward would carry immense weight. Ramos, without instruction, raised his musket and kept it leveled at the center of the V. Dwart did not tell him to lower it. The patch of dark water held steady, the air around us stale and heavy. Sweat ran into my eyes and stung. I wiped it away with the back of my wrist, my gaze fixed on the menacing V. Then, I heard a faint rasp from under the hull. Not wood on wood, not stone on wood, but the slow, grating rub of something hard that flexed. The canoe leaned a fraction, then settled, a terrifying intimacy with the unseen. In the other boat, Davy crouched, gripping the gunwale, his face a mask of primal fear. Arawa spoke to him in a low voice, shifting his weight to balance them. The V moved. It widened, then split, each arm sliding apart. I saw a line appear under the surface that tracked between them like the ridge of a moving back. The line passed under us in silence, its immense bulk creating no ripple, no splash, only a shudder that resonated through the canoe. Ramos twisted to follow it. "There," he said, his voice a strained whisper. "There." He wanted a command, a target, but no one gave it. The line faded, leaving only clear water, a deceptive calm. We took slow, deliberate strokes along the reeds, the lake appearing flat again. A turtle lifted its head near the scum margin and sank without a ripple, a mundane detail in a world turned terrifying. I desperately wanted to believe we had imagined the pattern, the pressure, the chilling passage, but I could not make myself believe it. I watched the reeds. Every few breaths, a narrow channel opened inside the mass and closed again, making no sound. At the mouth of a small inlet, we found a shelf of pale sand with marks on it. The marks were from a heavy body that had rolled once, then slid back into the water. The print of that roll had pressed palm-sized scales into the sand, each edge sharp and distinct. I stepped out and sank to my ankles in the soft sand, its heat surprising me after hours on the black water. I crouched and laid my hand against one scale mark. My fingers did not reach across it. Ramos came up beside me and planted the butt of his musket in the sand. He looked at the marks and swallowed hard. "I will load again," he said, though his gun was already primed. He needed to say something, anything, to break the silence. Dwart did not step onto the sand. He stood rigidly in the canoe, checking the line of the shore, his face grim. He spoke without looking at the marks. "We continue along the arc and return by the far bank. Short stops only. No waiting, no waste of powder." He had moved into the part of himself that clung to plan when events pushed against it. I had seen him enter that state when storms held us for days on a larger river. It did not always serve him well, and in this place, I feared it might be our undoing. We edged back into the lake, the sun sliding toward the canopy. The light took on a dull, bruised cast that made distances hard to judge. In the stern, Father Celestino counted under his breath, touching his cross to the gunwale with each 10th count. He had a small habit for each kind of unease. I had not seen this one before. When he saw me notice, he nodded once and stopped the counting, but he did not let go of the cross, his knuckles white. The first strike came without warning, a sudden, brutal ambush from the depths. The water bulged near the other canoe, and a length of dark, immense body rose, slamming down across their bow. The impact drove the forward half of the vessel under, throwing a geyser of spray into the air. Davy cried out once, a raw sound of terror, and vanished between the grasping arms of the reeds. Arawa, clinging to the gunwale with one hand, swung his paddle with the other. The blade hit flesh with a flat, sickening crack. The colossal length across the bow flexed, slid off, leaving deep gouges in the wood. The boat rocked hard, taking in water at an alarming rate. Ramos fired at the same instant, his musket aimed wildly where the body had vanished. The shot struck and the water foamed, but the bullet's path died, absorbed by the black water, without a trace. The acrid smell of powder mixed with a pervasive musk, assaulting our senses. My ears rang with the sudden violence. "Davy," I called before I could stop myself. The reeds moved in two places, slow and deliberate, a chilling indication of the creature's continued presence. Arawa did not look at us. He plunged his arm into the reeds and dragged his cousin up by the shoulder straps. The boy coughed, sputtering, and clung to the thwart, blood running from a fresh cut on his cheek. He stared at the water, silent, his face bearing the look of someone who had come up from a depth too fast, seeing things no man should. I counted his breaths without knowing why, a desperate attempt to anchor myself in reality. They steadied after a while, but his silence remained. We bailed with gourds, the other canoe shedding water in a slow trickle from its split seams. Dwart, his voice tight, pointed us toward a hummock no larger than a room, ringed with roots and drift. There, he said, we patch. No one argued. We moved with short, even strokes, keeping the paddles out of the deep sweep that had just passed, the whole lake seeming to hold its breath, waiting. On the hummock, we lifted the damaged bow of Arawa's canoe into the fork of a root and packed fibers into the gouges. I melted resin with a flame and spread it with the back of a spoon, my hands shaking as the resin set in thick bands that held the fibers in place. I breathed out through my nose, trying to steady them, trying to quell the rising panic. Ramos stood with his musket half-cocked, watching the water, his jaw working in silent tension. Arawa leaned over Davi, checking his arms and legs for breaks. The boy pushed his hand away, sitting up, his eyes wide and vacant. He still had not spoken. Father Celestino soaked a cloth and wiped the blood from the cut on his cheek. "You are alive," he said gently. "You remain so by staying close." He offered no more than that, his own face etched with worry. Then the surface around the hummock broke in 3 places at once. Each rise showed only the top line of a body. No head, no tail, just immense dark forms. The arcs moved in slow, even circles that tightened with each pass. They did not splash. They pressed the water aside and let it settle silently behind them, a coordinated, chilling encirclement. Dwart gripped the hull, staring at the circles, unable to call a course, his usual resolve faltering. I felt a heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the humid air, a rising tide of desperation. I heard my own breath, ragged and quick, and the quick shuffle of Ramos's boots on the root-strewn ground. "Back in," I said, surprising myself by speaking first, my voice urgent. "We cannot wait for full dark." Dwart blinked, as if he had forgotten I was there. He nodded once. "Go," he said. "We keep close. No gaps." The resin had set enough to hold, a fragile shield against the unknown. We pushed the canoe down, slid it into the water, and loaded fast. Davi took the middle without protest, his silence a heavy weight. I gave him my gourd for bailing, but he merely held it, not using it. We aimed for the far bank where the drowned trunks rose out of the water, our only hope of escape. The circles followed, relentless. I counted 3, then a 4th that held back, then closed the gap, ensuring our encirclement. Our strokes needed to be steady to keep the bows aligned, but my muscles screamed for quick, frantic bursts. I kept the rhythm anyway, a desperate attempt at control. The first trunk we passed held the hacked remains of a small altar. Twigs bound with new grass hung from it. A clay dish balanced in a split near the top, holding a paste that had dried and cracked. The smell was sharp and clean, unlike the musk, a brief, startling cut through the metallic taste in my mouth. Father Celestino crossed himself and reached toward the dish, but Arawa slapped his hand away. "Do not touch," he said, his voice flat, devoid of anger, as if every extra word cost breath he could not spare. "Not yours." The water deepened under the trunks. Our hull scraped something that was not wood, a long, low sound of friction. The canoe lifted and settled as if nudged from below, a chilling, deliberate touch. Dwart raised his paddle as if to strike, then lowered it. "Hold line," he said, his voice strained. "Do not strike unless it rises." He wanted to save energy for a clear shot. It was sound advice, but it offered no comfort in the face of such unseen, intelligent menace. A broad head broke the surface 2 canoe lengths ahead. It did not rise high, showing only the top line of the skull and the wide-set eyes. The skin was dark and thick, crisscrossed with old scars that ran in straight, deep channels, ancient wounds from battles unknown. The head moved slowly from side to side, without hurry, its focus unnervingly deliberate. The mouth did not open. A low breath came out through the nostrils, spreading across the water in a thin cloud that smelled of rotted leaves and fish oil, a stench of the abyssal deep. Ramos fired. The musket ball struck the head above the right eye and flattened with a dull thud, without breaking the thick, ancient skin. The animal slid under, its disappearance as silent as its emergence. The ripples reached us, tapping the hulls like a cold, knowing hand. I felt a cold heaviness in my gut and thought again of the capybara with the crushed ribs. We paddled harder, a desperate, futile effort against an impervious foe. The circles tightened further. A body rose under our stern and lifted us half a hand out of the water. The hull slithered over it and dropped, the shock running through my teeth. Davy grabbed the gunwale, holding it as if the wood itself could deliver him from the lake. He was not praying. He had moved past speech into a realm of pure animal terror. The sun hit the top of the canopy, throwing bars of light across the open water. In that shifting light, I saw a shape move that I had not seen before. It was not one body. It was two moving in line. The second followed the path of the first with a slight lag, their lengths equal. The second held back when the first rose. When the first slid under our bow, the second cut behind our stern. The pattern repeated. They were working to divide us, without touching the hulls, a chillingly intelligent tactic. I did not know if that was habit or intent, only that it kept our paddles off balance and pushed us relentlessly toward the deeper middle of the lake. "Steady," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Pick a point and do not vary." Dwart fixed his eyes on a gap between trunks, where a wedge of mud broke the line of the bank. "There," he said, and for once his choice matched mine. We drove hard, my shoulders burning with effort. I heard the scrape against the other canoe again, then a sharp crack as a thwart broke. The bow dipped and water came in fast. I swung us around, putting our stern against their beam. Ramos tossed his musket into our boat and climbed across without waiting for permission. The lighter hull rose. The damaged canoe settled to the gunwales. Arawa and the boy stayed with it. They did not try to climb across. Arawa shoved the empty canoe toward the closest trunk to wedge it there. It stuck for a breath, then slid free and drifted. He did not watch it go. He put both hands on our gunwale and pushed, helping to keep our bows aligned. He had decided to keep formation or die keeping it. The head rose again off our port bow, closer this time. I saw the lid of the left eye close and open, the skin there milky, pale. The animal had old damage in that eye, a testament to its ancient existence. I raised my paddle, a desperate, foolish gesture, and brought it down on the line where head met body. The blow did nothing. It was like striking stone. The head turned toward me and paused, its black, lidless eye fixed on mine. In that pause, I felt every part of my body prepare for the strike that did not come. Then it slid under with the same unhurried motion, leaving us rocking violently in its wake. We reached the wedge of mud and drove the bow into it. The hull stuck and held. We leaped into water up to our knees and dragged the boat farther onto the shelf, scrambling for purchase on the soft, yielding mud. The second hull bumped behind us and scraped onto the bank as well. Just beyond our reach, the two colossal bodies passed in a line, turning out toward the center again. The water over their backs smoothed as if pressed by a plank, leaving no trace of their passage, only the lingering terror. I stood with mud up to my shins, my hands on the bow line, and tried to slow my breathing, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the faces of the others. Sweat streaked the dust on Ramos's cheeks. Father Celestino's lips moved without sound, a silent prayer of thanks or supplication. Dwart's eyes were fixed on the open water, his expression unreadable. Davy stared at the wedge of mud as if it were the only solid thing in the world, his anchor in a reality that had just shattered. "We do not cross again today," I said, my voice hoarse, a declaration more than a suggestion. No one argued. The light had lowered to the point where the trunks drew long, distorted bands across the lake. Anything moving between them would be harder to track, harder to defend against. We climbed the small bank above the mud and found a patch where we could string hammocks between 3 sturdy roots. We set no fire. Smoke would bring attention and give us comfort without safety. We ate cold bread and strips of meat with our hands, but it tasted nothing. I kept the rolled skin near my pack and checked the resin patch with my thumb. It had held. A small victory in a night of overwhelming dread. As night settled, the lake gave the breath sound again, at longer intervals and from farther off. One breath would come from near the center, then, after a pause, another from the channel we had entered. The pattern repeated, a chilling sense of a pair keeping a circuit, always watching, always present. I lay in the hammock and counted the intervals, my mind desperately trying to make meaning from the gaps, to find a rhythm, a weakness. I stopped counting and listened to the small sounds of the others, shifting and whispering. I did not sleep for a long time. When I slept, it was thin, a shallow, restless slumber. Close to dawn, a new sound came. It was a dull knock against wood, repeated at measured gaps. I slid from the hammock and moved to the edge of the mud. In the dim pre-dawn light, I saw our empty canoe bump against a trunk, drift, and then bump again. It had come back from wherever the water had carried it, a ghostly return. It turned slowly until the gouged bow faced us, the resin patch looking pale against the dark wood. The boat rocked once more and came to rest against the mud at my feet. I could not decide if the return was chance or a gift, a silent offering from the depths. I only knew it was here. I pulled it up with both hands, feeling the weight of wet wood and silt. Behind me, I heard Dwart drop from his hammock. He came to the edge and looked without speaking, his face etched with a grim resolve. "We repair fully," he said, his voice flat but firm. "We plan a crossing in daylight. We make an end of this, or we do not leave." He had given up the circuit, given up caution, and moved to a different kind of resolve. I did not call it courage, and I did not call it despair. It was a single, unyielding line he had set for himself when all other lines had failed. I wrapped the bow line twice around a root and tied it off. Then I turned to the others and began to divide the tasks for the morning. The air before dawn hung thick and still, heavy with unspoken dread. We gathered what little dry fiber we could find beneath the roots and scraped resin from the seams of old branches. My hands ached from pulling at knots and stripping bark, but I did not let myself slow. The others worked in grim silence, each lost in their own thoughts of the coming ordeal. The boy Davi stayed crouched by the bow line, as if touching the wood anchored him, his eyes wide and unblinking. Father Celestino murmured a prayer under his breath while warming a strip of resin with an ember held between two stones, his faith a fragile shield against the encroaching terror. Ramos cleaned his musket and checked the powder horn 3 times, though he had fired only once. His eyes kept straying to the water, haunted. Dwart drew in the mud with a stick, marking paths from our spit back to the tributary, not looking at the lines after he scratched them. He only set them down as if the act itself steadied him, a ritual against chaos. By the time the sun reached the top of the canopy, the patched canoe held shape again. The resin bands glistened where the morning heat had softened them and then set. We tested the hull in shallow water, rocking it from side to side. It groaned but did not open. The sound carried farther than I liked, every ripple seeming loud against the still lake. I glanced at the reeds, half expecting them to part, to reveal the waiting horrors. Nothing moved. We ate a thin meal of fina mixed with water. No one wanted meat. Afterward, Dwart gathered us near the bow. His face looked drawn, the lines deeper than the day before. He spoke plainly, his voice devoid of emotion. "We cannot circle the lake. We cannot wait on this spit until the water rises. We cross the open and follow the far channel. Once we reach running water, the current will carry us. We stay close. No separation, no shots unless the body rises against the hull. If we are divided, we do not return for each other. Understand?" He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze unwavering. No one argued. Even Ramos, who had always spoken against caution, nodded without a word, his bravado replaced by a cold, desperate acceptance. We shoved the canoes into the water and climbed in. The surface felt wrong from the first stroke. The paddles cut with no sound, as if the black water swallowed the movement, our reflections blurring and bending eerily beneath us. The air smelled of musk again, thick and cloying. Arawa sat in the bow of his canoe, his eyes fixed ahead. His cousin Davi crouched close behind him. The boy still had not spoken since being pulled from reeds, and his silence pressed harder on me than any sound, a constant reminder of the depths of our terror. We aimed for a gap between two tall trunks where the channel should run. The distance was greater than it had seemed from shore, a vast, open expanse of black water. Halfway across, the water rose in a massive swell beneath us. Both canoes lifted, drifted apart, and settled, a sickening lurch that threatened to capsize us. I gripped the gunwale until my knuckles widened, bracing for the inevitable strike. But no strike came, only the swell and the profound, terrifying silence that followed. Dwart hissed for us to keep line, and we brought the hulls together again, paddling with desperate, synchronized strokes. Then, the first true attack came. A long, dark shape shot from the black water and struck the stern of our boat. The blow threw me forward onto my knees, sending the hull spinning halfway around. Water poured over the edge, cold and black. Ramos fired blind into the surface, the smoke rolling low and clinging to the water, its acrid smell mixing with the musk. Arawa swung his paddle against the shape as it withdrew. The blade struck hard and split, shattering against the creature's impervious hide. He tossed the broken half aside and took the spare, his movements swift and grim. The serpent's body rose once more, higher this time, showing the glistening curve of its back, covered in a film of scum. Deep scars crossed it in ancient lines. The head did not show. It slid back under with the same smooth, terrifying power, leaving us to bail frantically. We bailed fast, my hands burning from scooping water with the gourd. Davi pulled too, his silence broken only by quick, desperate breaths. The canoe steadied, though the stern sat lower than before, threatening to swamp us. My chest pounded, and I tasted salt from sweat and powder. I looked to Dwart. His jaw was locked tight, his eyes fixed on the gap ahead, his resolve unwavering. That grim steadiness was the only reason I kept my strokes even, refusing to yield to the panic clawing at my throat. Another rise came, this time on the flank of the other canoe. The serpent pushed up and rolled its immense length across their side. The hull tipped dangerously, threatening to capsize them completely. Arawa braced with both legs and shoved with his paddle against the broad, scaly back. For an instant, I saw the full width of it stretched across their boat, thicker than any trunk, its ancient scales catching the dull light. Then it slid away. The canoe rocked back upright, half filled with water. Davi cried out a raw, guttural sound, and struck the surface with his palm as if to drive it back. His voice cracked, but did not carry far. The sound seemed swallowed by the lake, absorbed by its silent, malevolent power. We paddled harder, aiming for the trunks, every stroke feeling slower than the last. The water dragged at us, as if holding us in place. My arms shook with exhaustion and fear. Ramos swore under his breath, repeating the same word again and again until it became nothing more than a meaningless sound. Father Celestino began his count again, this time aloud, marking every 10th breath with a press of the cross. His voice held steady, despite the tremor in his hands, a testament to his unwavering faith. Then, the serpent's head rose at last. It broke the surface directly between the two canoes, so close that drops of its fetid water struck my face. The eyes were black and lidless, the scar over one milky and pale, a chilling testament to its ancient existence. The nostrils opened wide, and the breath that came out stank of rot and fish oil, a stench of the abyssal deep. The mouth opened a fraction, showing rows of thick, backward-curved teeth, each one a dagger. The sound that came was not a hiss. It was a low rush of air, steady and heavy, that seemed to vibrate the water itself, resonating through our very bones. I froze. My hands still clutched the paddle, but did not move, paralyzed by the sheer, unholy terror of that ancient face. The lidless I fixed on me and held. I felt as though my chest might stop, my breath catching in my throat. Then Dwart shouted, "Stroke." The command, sharp and urgent, snapped me loose from my paralysis. We drove our paddles into the water with desperate, frantic strength. The serpent did not strike again. It slid back, leaving a trail of bubbles that widened and vanished, its retreat as silent as its attack. The gap between the trunks drew closer, a beacon of hope. The water grew shallower beneath us, the paddle tips scraping silt. My arms ached with every pull, every muscle screaming, but we pushed on, driven by the primal urge for survival. Behind us, the surface bulged once more, a final menacing presence. But the body did not break again. We reached the channel, and the current at last took hold, seizing us, pulling us forward with a speed we could not match by strength alone. We drifted fast between the trunks, the black water narrowing and swirling, carrying us away from the nightmare. The sound of the lake faded behind us, replaced by the rush of the river. I turned and saw only the still surface, and the pale scum spread wide. Nobody followed. No breath sounded, only the trees leaning close and the current dragging us away from the unnamed horrors of that cursed lake. I let out a breath I had not known I held, a ragged gasp of relief. We did not speak until the channel bent and the lake was lost behind the curve. Only then did Dwart lower his paddle and sag forward, his formidable resolve momentarily broken. His voice came low, barely a whisper. "It is done. We leave it there." No one answered. I looked at the boy, Davy. His eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed on the water ahead. He had not found his voice again. I feared he never would. We did not camp that night. We rode the current until our arms failed, then tied the canoes together and drifted under the stars, too traumatized for sleep. None of us slept. Every ripple felt like a warning. Every shadow looked like a coil. The river carried us, whether we willed it or not, a relentless conveyor belt away from the lake, yet the terror clung to us. And in my mind, even as the sounds of the lake faded, I could still hear the slow, steady breath that rose from the black water, marking the measure of something too large for us to face. The current carried us until our arms stiffened. At dawn, we made shore at a bank of clay that sloped into the water. We pulled the canoes halfway up and sat in silence, too tired to build shelter or fire. The air was cooler, and mist clung to the branches above us. I closed my eyes for a moment, but did not sleep. Behind my eyelids, I still saw the wide head rising from the black lake. Davy broke the silence first, his voice low, barely audible. It followed us. We looked to him, startled. His face was drawn, eyes dark from lack of sleep, fixed on the water. Arawa gripped his cousin's shoulder and spoke in their tongue, urging him to quiet. But the boy shook his head and stared at the river. He repeated, "It followed." His words carried a chilling weight that I did not want to accept. Ramos spat into the mud. "We are free of it. The current is ours now." He said it too quickly, too vehemently. He wanted to believe his own words. Father Celestino raised his cross and whispered a prayer, then told us to stay near the bank and move at first light again. He avoided the boy's eyes. Dwart said nothing, rolling his charts back into the oilcloth with steady hands, though I saw the tremor in his jaw. A new, cold dread settled over us, a premonition that Davy's words were not the ravings of a frightened boy, but a dire prophecy. We launched again by midday, the river twisting narrower than before. The canopy closed in overhead, throwing the water into deep shadow, creating a suffocating tunnel. Birds called from far away, but did not show themselves, their usual chatter replaced by an eerie quiet. I let the rhythm of paddling steady me, trying to push away the lingering fear. For an hour, nothing disturbed us. I began to think perhaps Ramos had been right, that we were indeed free. Then the surface broke behind us. A swell rose, tall enough to rock both canoes violently. The sound that followed was the same heavy breath we had heard on the lake, unmistakable, terrifyingly close. Davy let out a cry, pressing his head to the gunwale, and Arawa held him tight, his face grim. Dwart looked back once, his eyes wide with renewed horror, and shouted, "Faster!"